Can we all just take a minute to appreciate that Tom Cruise is over 60 years old and he's still making these movies? Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind Reviews. As you can see, I'm back in the suit on the hottest day of the year so far. Oh, this is a bad idea. And that's because in this video I'm going to be reviewing my second most anticipated movie of 2023, and that is Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. In the highly anticipated 7th instalment of the spy action thriller franchise, super spy Ethan Hunt is back for another impossible mission which sees him and his IMF team working together to track down a dangerous weapon before it falls into the wrong hands. Based on the television series created by Bruce Geller, the movie was directed and co-written by Christopher McQuarrie and co-written by Eric Jendrison, and features an all-star cast including Tom Cruise, Hayley Atwell, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, Rebecca Ferguson, Vanessa Kirby, Isaiah Morales, Pom Klementieff, Henry Czerny, Carrie Lewis, Shea Wingham and Greg Tarzan Davis. The Mission Impossible franchise is one of the greatest action movie franchises that has ever been made, and somehow manages to find a way of getting better with each instalment. I mean, minus the slight dip with MI2, but it's been an uphill climb since then. So yes, as I said, this was one of my most anticipated movies of 2023, right behind Across the Spider-Verse. Another Part 1 movie. We're getting a lot of those, aren't we? And going into this movie, I did wonder if the real impossible mission was if this movie could be as good, if not better, than the previous two installments, Rogue Nation and Fallout. Two of my favourite action movies of all time. Well, it tries, and it doesn't quite match the previous two movies, but I don't think it's disappointing. In fact, I would say that this is a genuinely great movie overall. Well, half a movie. So let's take a look. But wait, just before we jump into this review, I do need to give you guys a little bit of a heads up that this is going to be as spoiler free as possible. But I will need to mention a few details here and there, so if you want to go into this movie absolutely blind and not want to know anything about it whatsoever, I'd advise skipping this video. And with that out of the way, let's get into this review. So, what is the story this time around? In this instalment, Ethan and the IMF are tasked with finding a special key that quite literally holds the key to a powerful entity that threatens the safety of the entire world. And as they say in the movie, it's just a typical Monday. I want to say it's not quite as simple as that, but that is the main plot that kicks everything into gear. And that honestly could have been enough. But there's a lot more to it, with new characters introduced, exploring the pre-existing characters and delving into Ethan's history, which they've never really done before. And part of the reason for that is probably because of the limited runtime that these movies usually have. Prior to Dead Reckoning Part 1 being released, the director Christopher McQuarrie has said that the reason why he wanted to make this movie a two-parter was because of the story that he wanted to tell. They needed more time to not only tell the story that they wanted to do, but to try and infuse as much action as people have come to expect from this franchise. So it makes sense from a storytelling standpoint, and I will admit, because of how much happens in this, I am happy that they did do a two-parter, as it does feel warranted in this case. I think this is the longest I've gone without talking about performances. Starring in this movie is a number of returning actors from previous Mission movies, with Tom Cruise obviously returning as Ethan Hunt. I think Tom Cruise is at his absolute best in this movie, giving a very varied performance compared to what we normally would see within these movies. There's a really great balance of comedy and drama in this performance as always, but with a new addition of Ethan's story. There's a bit more of a desperation and a personal story for him. The performance is great as always, and the same goes for the physical side as well, with Cruise at the age of 60 still going strong, performing death-defying stunts most people wouldn't even try. But with this more personal story being introduced, it does mean that some of the regular Mission actors do get a little less screen time this time around. But their roles are no less important, and they each get moments to shine, like Rebecca Ferguson as Ilsa, Simon Pegg as Benji, Ving Rhames as Luther, and Vanessa Kirby as the White Widow. Even Henry Czerny as Kittredge, all the way back from Mission Impossible 1, makes his long overdue return. All of them are great once again, and I love what each of them bring to this movie. Although I do think there will be a few decisions made in this movie that might prove divisive. You know, if Kittredge can come back, does that mean that we can see Anthony Hopkins and Lawrence Fishburne as well? But it's not just the familiar faces in this one. We get introduced to a few new characters, such as Grace, played by Hayley Atwell. I absolutely love Hayley, and it was absolutely awesome getting to see that she was going to be part of this movie, but I was a little unsure about what sort of role that she was going to have in this. I'll be honest, I thought it was only going to be a small part, so I was quite surprised just how prominent a character she actually is. Not just from a story perspective, but physically as well, as she does get to take part in most of the bigger set pieces. She has a big part to play in the story overall, and over the course of the movie we do get to understand her motivations and her reasons behind what it is that she's doing. The way that they went with her character in this is a little bit like what they did with Ilsa back in Rogue Nation, where we're not entirely sure whether she's trustworthy or not. I like how that is built up across the course of the movie, and I did find myself getting invested in her story. I really want to know a lot more about her, and I do hope that we get to see more of her in the future. Hayley is fantastic here. She has great chemistry with the others, especially Tom Cruise. Her performance overall is very strong, and I would honestly say that she is one of the best parts of this movie. There's even an Agent Carter reunion in this movie with Shea Wingham playing somebody on Ethan's tail, so that was cool. And I will admit I did like a few of the Top Gun Maverick cast getting in on this too, like Greg Tarzan Davis and Charles Parnell. Even Carrie Lewis makes an appearance. The other standout to me was easily Pom Klementif as an assassin called Paris. It's so weird seeing her out of a mantis gear. She's really over the top in this movie, but she is a load of fun, and she is clearly having an absolute blast in this film. She looks pretty awesome too. There's also a new villain that's introduced in this movie called Gabriel, and he is somebody who does have a connection to Ethan's past. And while that is definitely an interesting idea to introduce into this movie, unfortunately for me, he is probably the weakest part of this film. The performance from Isai Morales is good, but in terms of character, he is a bit disappointing. He only really feels like he's in this to act as a physical threat and to give Ethan a bit more of an emotional push, but he doesn't really feel very menacing, scary or threatening. The entity he is working for is, but he isn't, and unfortunately he is who we see a lot more of throughout this film. I really want to like this villain. I do think that he is played by a really good actor. He's got this charm to him, and he does provide a very good physical match for Ethan, but he is disappointing overall. There isn't really an awful lot to him. We don't really get to explore anything else about him, so I do feel like maybe they're trying to hold off on this and explore that in part 2, but I'm not quite sure. I do hope that that is the case and we do get to see a little bit more of who he is in part 2. As this is only a part 1 movie, it does mean that there is a cliffhanger in this movie, but not really. It's one of those films that does feel very self-contained enough to be its own thing, but there's still a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up. In a way, it's a little bit like Fellowship of the Ring. You know that this isn't going to be the entire story, but it is a satisfying experience on its own. It does feel a little bit slower than the other movies, and I think that this does play a part in it because it feels like they're placing all the pieces on the board and setting up threats and motivations for where part 2 is going. So I don't think that this feels as action-packed as some of the previous movies, but one thing that they do in this one is they do focus a lot more on the espionage elements, which honestly is a really good change of pace, and it does make this movie feel a little bit different. That being said, this is still a straight up action movie, and the action is absolutely fantastic. They are expertly handled, and there is a great variety of bigger and smaller sequences throughout. Everybody is giving these scenes their all, and because these actors are actually getting involved, it really ramps up the tension and drama. The standout sequences for me are easily the car chase in Rome and the entire train sequence, both of which are absolutely spectacular. The car chase is actually quite a fun idea, focusing on Ethan and Grace basically having to work together after they've been handcuffed to each other and finding ways of driving a really small uncontrollable car. I will admit it did remind me a lot of the Taskmaster chase from the Black Widow movie, but I feel like there's a lot more tension in this sequence. The stunt work is also some of the best so far, and I've always appreciated how willing Tom Cruise is to actually do these bigger stunts, and it gets better seeing the other actors getting stuck in too, especially Hayley and Rebecca Ferguson once again. But I can't talk about the stunts in this movie without talking about the big one. Every Mission Impossible movie features a big stunt with Tom Cruise, and each tries to get bigger than the last one. With Ghost Protocol featuring Cruise scaling up the Burj Khalifa, Rogue Nation featured him clinging onto the side of a plane, and Fallout featured him dangling from a helicopter. So what they decided to do in this movie was have Tom Cruise ride a bike off a cliff and go into a base jump. They have been hyping this one up for a while, and the work that went into making this happen is genuinely impressive. I'd honestly recommend having a look at the behind the scenes videos for how they made some of these sequences. They are really worth a watch. But compared to what they got up to in the previous movies, this one does feel like a bit of a step down, but it is still genuinely impressive, and I will fully admit that seeing the trailer for the first time, I was absolutely holding my breath during that scene. I do think that the biggest stunt in this movie is the train sequence, where they are actually fighting on top, inside and dangling from the carriages, and they actually threw a steam train off a bridge. I mean, how can that not be impressive? There are some incredible scenes in this one, even the smaller stuff like a fight that breaks out down a claustrophobic alleyway. It's all expertly handled and it needs to be seen on the big screen. That being said, there are a few CG enhancements here and there, especially in one sequence early on, and I think it does look mostly good overall, and thankfully it is kept to a minimum, and I'm sure the VFX houses are very thankful for that. I also love where it is that they visit throughout this movie. The Mission Impossible movies do go to some absolutely gorgeous locations, and in this movie they get to visit places like Rome, Amsterdam, Abu Dhabi, Venice and Norway. These are absolutely gorgeous locations and I love what it is that they do with each of these environments. These are big movies, and seeing where these locations are, seeing these set pieces take place in these locations, it helps build that scale up and these movies feel so much more bigger because of it. I will admit I did like the usual sense of humour that these movies are normally injected with, and it fits pretty well and it is actually funny, and thankfully they always know when to hold off whenever something needs to be either dramatic or emotional. I do think that this is a lot darker than some of the past films, but it makes a lot of sense considering everything that is happening. Tonally it is balanced out very well, and I think that within regards to the entire franchise, I think that this fits in very well. I do think that compared to the other movies, this movie does have its own identity, and I think that what they do with each movie is, because each movie does feel very unique all on its own, it does help maintain a way of keeping this franchise feel fresh. And it's funny to think of what it is that they are doing in this movie. If this film came out about 10 years ago or so, I think that this movie would have been considered a full-on sci-fi movie. I think it really goes to show just how far technology has come over the years since this franchise did start, and how far it is potentially going to go in the future. And that is pretty scary. When it comes to the music for this movie, Lorne Balfe returns from Fallout to create the soundtrack for this movie, and it is great once again. It's big, it's epic, it's everything that you expect a Mission Impossible soundtrack to be, but it also manages to have a few more subtler moments, and it's able to sprinkle that iconic Mission Impossible theme throughout. Now, I'm going to say something that I think that the Brits watching this video are not going to appreciate me saying, and that is, in my opinion, I think that the Mission Impossible theme is one of the best spy themes that has ever been made. Look, I should be saying Bond, absolutely, everyone knows the theme. But with the Mission Impossible theme, there's so much more variety, and what each of the different composers have been able to do in each film is tweak it to fit different situations. And it's a flexible enough theme that that is able to happen. But with the theme for Bond, not so much. The only composer, in my opinion, that has been able to do something very unique and very interesting with that theme is Hans Zimmer for No Time to Die. And the reason that he was able to do that is quite simply because he's Hans Zimmer. Look, I think that the theme is great, and I think that the soundtrack for this movie is absolutely fantastic. It really fits the tone that this movie has gone for, and it never feels either out of place or overbearing at any time. And as I said, I really like it overall. I really enjoyed this movie and where this story has gone and what it ultimately sets up for the second half. I am really excited for part 2. I have absolutely no reason to doubt that the next part will be good, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the story goes from here and how it all wraps up. And I do hope, fingers crossed, that it is a satisfying conclusion. Overall, I had an absolute blast with this movie. It's big and action-packed and well worth seeing on the big screen. I loved the action and the stunt work as always, and I really enjoyed the performances from everyone involved. This is a fantastic movie that action fans and Mission Impossible fans will enjoy. I'd go so far as to say that this is a must-watch movie, and as I said, is worthy of a big screen experience. The only negative for me is the villain, who does feel very weak and isn't very threatening, but the actual threat does feel a lot scarier than what we had in some of the previous movies, and I'm really curious where the story revolving around this entity is heading. It is a great story overall and a great addition to the franchise. It isn't the best by any means, but it has proven that Mission Impossible is still on top form and able to produce some of the greatest action movies ever made. I thought that this was a fantastic movie overall, and with all that being said, my rating for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed this movie, and I highly encourage you to see this movie on the big screen if you can. This has been an incredible franchise, and it is so great seeing that this franchise 7 movies in is still going strong. So we'll see how part 2 turns out. Well, I think that is everything I'm going to say for this review. So if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that is going on here. If you have seen Dead Reckoning Part 1, let me know down below what you think about it, plus which movie in the franchise is your favourite. And if you have any recommendations for any future Rewind reviews you would like me to do in the future, let me know down below. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.